2 parole in lingua italiana e 3 parole in lingua inglese. Esclusivamente mi metto qui in mezzo a David e a Francesco. Il mio e di Maria Pilar è un semplice ringraziamento a chi ha voluto e ha partecipato attivamente all'organizzazione di questo bel momento, un dialogo tra 2 amanti dell'architettura, praticata e non praticata, praticata e praticata, perché l'architettura e la critica di architettura sono l'architettura. Lo diceva chi è molto più titolato di me, una critica attiva all'architettura provoca una buona architettura. Questo è quello che oggi si concretizza su questo palco. So thanks David to be here. Just few words from Maria Pilar, and then the stage is yours and Francesco.
No, really few words to two great teachers for us. This morning we discussed about education in architecture, so we just have to thank you for what you did for architects, for architecture, and for all the young people that are now waiting to listen to you, and also for generations of architects that studied your work, both in the theoretical and the practice, and so thank you so much for being here.
So, David, Sir David, thank you for coming, and the stage is yours.
How are you? But I don't know exactly, because to ask a question to David is a little bit complicated for me, as I know him since many years, and I have so many members. There is something which is very peculiar in David's career, I think, which is represented by the fact that he created a style which is not the style. Style implies all the idea of an attitude which is a characteristic of the interpretation that any architect gives of a different situation. What is extremely interesting in David's works is the fact that instead he's searching through his architecture to find what makes very different situation and very different opportunities he has and had during his career to the common and what is continuous. In other terms, David's work is, in my opinion today, the best, or one of the best expression of the fact that at the bottom of the continuous differentiation of the form of expression and styles in architecture is based on some fundamental views, on some fundamental way of approaching the problems. And this is not only represented by the formal characteristic of his work, but the way in which his works are nourished by a continuous confrontation with the environment around, from the historical point of view and from the physical point of view. I wouldn't say naturalistic, but I would say physical point of view. And this is something which is fascinating for me. We are living in a society when we are looking all the time from what is different, what is the appearances of the differences. And in this way we ignore instead what is permanent in other way of living and in our relationship with the environment. David works is the expression of the research of what is permanent, what is remaining there in spite of the fact that apparently everything is continuously changing. If there is an architect of our generation, and for this reason I am a friend of David's friend and admire his work, is the fact that all what he did is an act of resistance to the attempts to perceive the transformation of our world as a continuous transformation, producing continuous novelty. There is also something more, which is much more interesting for me. It's not true. It's not true a good critic produce a good architecture. It's true exactly the opposite. A good architecture produces good critics. History is full of examples of that. And there are some friends here that know very well the work of some architects which transformed the critics of their times and which is much more important, the historical approach to architecture of their times. But the reaction that continuously, without crying, and this is another aspect for which I admire David, is the fact that very quietly, very simple, with a great coherence, is always opposing to the factor to think that architecture is the producing of everyday new. The obsession of to be modern, to be really contemporaneous. There is a fantastic essay of Hans Blumenberg on this. If you wanted to do a very good exercise, you students, you shouldn't go to classes. Not go to classes. Don't go to any courses of history, or any courses, and spend 5 days to read Blumenberg. When you succeeded to read Blumenberg, you can pass any kind of courses and any kind of examination in any of, I would say, European school. Blumenberg say the great gift of the great Greek philosopher was to resist hybris. You know this beautiful Greek word, hybris. The opposite, the hybris is the opposite of any idea of justice, of any idea to be exactly able to perceive the nature of time passing. Hybris is something which makes you completely blind in front of all that. Dike. To resist hybris of new. Well, David is a very successful architect. He had a beautiful and challenging professional occasions. He was exposed, I think. I don't speak with him every week, so I don't know exactly what's happened during his week. He was exposed. He had been exposed. He is exposed to the temptation of the hybris of new continuously. Also because people around us, they are always asking to us to do something new. Well, David resisted that, and I think that this is the characteristic of his architecture. And for this reason, I think that good architecture, beautiful buildings, he designed is something challenging. The critics and the historians to resist to the very same hybris, to think that every day around us something new is appearing. Now you have to speak in English.
Was that a question? You threw in some words which resonate, of course. You said permanence, and of course, novelty and the idea of new, and the idea of ordinary and also the common. And so let me respond to those a little bit. The question of permanence is a difficult one in architecture, because in one sense we know what it means, because architecture always look for permanence insofar that it should last a long time, okay? And I think all architects have a little bit of that vanity. But also, I suppose we think about permanence in terms of substance. So permanence in a way is a little bit of a critique of modernism, which tended through new construction techniques to forget a little bit about the qualities that we admired in previous architectures which did pursue permanence. But I think permanence in our time isn't about the physical lasting of things. I think it's as much to do with the other things that you mentioned, which is the idea that things are shared. I think things can only have permanence if we can value them in a common way. And this is, I suppose, the theme that I had always been interested in and continue to be so, insofar that architecture is somehow, it should be, it is somewhere, an expression of common concerns. The modern movement confused us a little bit because also it's about innovation. So we cannot put aside innovation. Innovation is important. But when innovation is connected to novelty, and maybe this idea of novelty and the new is maybe somehow connected to the commercial world. So we're sitting here during the week of Saloni del Mobile, where I would have to say the design world in the last 30 or 40 years has, like the architecture world, shifted its focus from the Bauhausian ambitions of applying design to industrial processes to create the most beautiful objects at the most economical way for the most people. I was trained by architects who worked for the common good, I would say, or their commissions post-war generation was engaged to a very high degree in building housing, building schools, building universities, building our cities building a new society. The generation that taught me. When I came out of architecture school in the late 70s, I found I was in England at the time of a deep recession, and also at the moment of Margaret Thatcher, who in a way has become the sort of poster girl for free market, development. And her idea was that the state was inefficient, the public systems were inefficient, and the private sector was efficient. So what we've seen over my professional life has been a shift, total shift, from the idea that design and architecture was engaged in sort of social ideas to one where we service a market. The truth is, as architects, certainly in the Anglo-Saxon world, is that we are valued when we can give value. And that value is financial value. So if we can increase the value of land, value of property, then we are very, very useful. Otherwise, we're not so useful. And if we think about that in terms of housing, we have to say that, if I wasn't an architect, and I would ask an architect, why are you not building more housing for people? What's happened to social housing? Why are you architects not building social housing? Because no one commissions us to build social housing because there is no money in social housing. So in London, they're building a lot of housing, but it's not housing for people. It's housing for money. It's the leveraging of land value. So we found ourselves in this short period from 1980s to now, increasingly in the service of a very well-working financial capitalist system, which is nothing wrong unless there's no other compensation. And we now find ourselves in a situation where we, as a profession, where, as I say, we found ourselves as architects more and more enclosed in our professional limits, less and less valuable in social terms. And as we wake up to the two big crises of our time, where we could make a contribution, the two crises are social inequality and the built environment is not compensating for social inequality. One would have to say the ambitions post-war amongst planners and architects was that our built environment somehow compensated, protected the inequalities of our life. That we should be able to take our children down a very nice street to a nice school, and we should be able to live in a reasonable house. This should be our rights. So now we realize the scale of this crisis of social inequality. We discover professionally we are locked in our office with so little opportunity to change. Now we realize this also the second crisis of our time in terms of how I'm not talking about Trump and other things, I'm just talking about things where we can have influence. The second crisis being the environmental crisis, where again, our profession and the larger profession of construction makes such a big negative contribution at the point when we should be able to give leadership and idea. Again, we find ourselves locked in our office, locked in the constraints of a project. How much can you do within a project to deal with embedded CO2 and climate change? You can have better windows, you can make the building a bit more thermally, but that's not really going to change the story. The story is, are we building the right things in the right place, with the right materials, etc., etc. The decisions are not in the studio, they're before they hit the studio. So we found ourselves as designers and architects needing or being part of something where we should be asking more questions. And at this point, compared to when I began and the generation before me, we are less able to ask those questions. And I think that's the difficulty of our time, and I think the students here, this is a challenge of the next generation, to think about how to be designers and architects. And the thing that's clear is that studios like mine are not the model. The model is not anymore the signature architectural project. We can be romantic about it, we can be nostalgic about it, but that's not really the center of where we should be going. And I think, in a sense, my generation was very privileged to exist at a particular moment. But I think we really have to think in a very different way now about what it means to be an architect. And by the way, it does not mean undervaluing the physical quality, the quality of space, the quality of material, the way we build, the way we design. It's still important. We can't just become environmentalists, socialists, environmental socialists. We can't become politicians. We have to be architects. We deal with stuff. But we have to find ways by which that stuff has more meaning. And in that way, I think we, as a profession, have to become as interested in process as we are in result. And that's the big challenge for us as architects, because we always like the end. We judge things by the result. And we are in an image world. It's much easier to convey what we've done by an image of something than it is about a process of something. But I think process has to become important. And we were just in the Renzo piano space, and Renzo, from his very early days, was always interested in process and problem solving as a fundamental part of architectural practice.
Well, I would like to talk in Italian, but in the family only Evelyn speaks fluently Italian. I agree with your diagnosis. some point. Is it true that it seems that centuries are passed since the moment that we were educated in the shadow of what's happened in Europe during the 20s for a very short period, and immediately after the war. And obviously I am, and I think that David too, I am tempted to be nostalgic for this age. But nostalgia is never a very good friend or a good advice. It gives good advices. But we have also to very, very, very clear in front of what the situation that is in front of us. There was a track, David, when was Lucan, who said, looking at the profession around him, he said, okay, take 95% of the building and let it to the architect, the remaining 5%. I think that we are facing to a new situation. There is 98% of the building, and the space remaining to the architect is only 2%. And we have to be very careful to distinguish what is steel, and I agree completely with the arguments with that, with what David said before, what distinguishes architecture from what is not architecture. And which is the major difference, if you think seriously. The major difference is represented by the fact that we produce a lot of things on the basis of the simple need. Apparently. The new shapes, the new inventions, the new everything is the representation of freedom or research. In reality, no. It's just expression of a condition of need, of poetry. We are poor. And for this reason, the quantity of architecture, which is not architecture, is increasing. Because when there is no architecture, this is the presentation of the poetry of our environment in general. Poetry because they are our forms of what we produce, what you do. You do in your schools. I had been lucky during my life to teach in Europe, in Italy, in the United States, and so I know I still sometimes go to teach there, and I know what is the expression. What in general you produce in the School of Architecture is expression of misery, poverty, just need, slaves of needs. Need of the request arriving from the society that everything has a value only if it's apparently new. Slaves of the clients. The clients.
I know exactly what you're saying, and of course, I agree. On the other hand, the question is it correct to say that we need architects always? Not necessarily, because people are capable of building. I mean, if you think back to another time, vernacular architecture, which had a certain innocence to it, was perfectly good. Why? because there was a directness between the user and the realization. What we now have is a mediator, which is the market.
Yeah.
And that gets between us, what we actually need, and how it's delivered. And I think this is a slightly different thing. And I think this is the big question, what role do we play as architects, and what role should we be playing? You have to start thinking, if you travel around, how much architecture do you find? I mean, if we look in Domus or we look in Casabella, there are so many good architects. Really a lot of good buildings. And I would say more now than maybe 30 years ago. I mean, in a sense, there's a high professional level. Young studios in Switzerland, young studios in Germany, in Spain, some very nice projects. But you drive around any European country, I mean, don't even think about America, or think about North of England. You realize that architecture that we talk about is a sort of marginal interest. It's like we're sitting in a little club talking about architecture as if it's important. We go and fly and see a nice building by somebody, or we go and find a good project, like a small boutique thing. But it's not 98%, it's 99.5% of the world is not planned. And I think the big problem is planning. So, and I think that's what we have to think about. Does one building by a very talented young architect in Germany, it makes us happy, and it possibly makes the people in the house happy. But this is a very small little mark in the bigger picture, and I'm not sure we can amuse ourselves any longer by this satisfaction, by us being a marginal, dying, interest group, sort of spotting talent of people doing small things while the rest burns. And I think this is really the question about how can we find ourselves. And to some degree, I feel like the last 20 or 30 years, we've hidden our property by the high success of certain iconic projects. And I'm guilty of it too. I'm part of this hypocrisy. So you do a nice museum somewhere, and architecture's in a good place. No, it's not. That museum's in a good place, but the rest of the town is shitty. So why have we surrendered the general physical environment and found it acceptable to in a way be satisfied by one or two extremely nice buildings by extremely good, talented young architects? Because there's plenty. I do not believe this is a problem of architectural talent, for instance. I think there's probably more than there's ever been. The question is, how does that talent get used? How do we become more relevant? How can we contribute? Because the truth is, by the time a project arrives in our office, 80% of the decisions, 90% of the decisions have been made. It's here, in this red line. Can't we just move it? No, you can't move it. Well, just a meter. No, you have to stand back from it. Can't it be lower? No, it has to be this high, but okay. Could it be housing instead of office? No, it has to be office. Okay, so what do? You put a facade on it. That's what you guys, you're the architects, make it into something good. By the time it's in your office, it's done. So how do you get further out to say, why are we building offices in this area? Why are we not building housing here? Or why are we building here, not closer to the roads there? And why are we, et cetera, et cetera. How do we find a way back into a dialogue that makes us more useful because we could be trusted to ask questions which are not just about us producing buildings that promote ourselves better? Because most of the times architects complain, they complain because the project is limited, not, I would say, because of environmental or social issues, but because of creative. It limits their creativity. And this is where I think the profession has to really rethink what it means to be creative.
One problem, one aspect of what you say that is the fact that what is architecture very often is something that you don't see. We are judging architecture as something that is always something that you should see. And we are living in an age where this is exploding, this attitude, this way of thinking that architecture is something that should be, as you say before you used this word, iconic. Very often the building is iconic for several reasons which are only partially related to the work done by the architect. There is a fundamental reason why a building becomes iconic is the passing of time. Time as strong as the pencil of the architect. Even more, much more. Can think of any of the iconic building from Leo Contesta Alberti through our time. Is the shaping, the role of the time. How is it possible to challenge and to work with time? One of the fundamental tools in the head of the architect is to be a very good architect, which doesn't mean to be a very good builder, but to build appropriately. You can design the most beautiful beam, but the problem is how this beam is used in an appropriate way. And this is the difference between architecture and construction. An example, David, that is present to your brain as it's inside of my brain. I know that you all know this beautiful museum of the Brazilian architecture that Paulo Mendes da Rocha built in São Paulo. It's just a peak suspended. And structurally, it's very, very simple. Very, very simple. But it's perfect. Why? Because the architect was so clever, so prepared, that he obliged the engineer to think the structure of the post-stressed beam in terms to calculate how much would come down. So it's perfect. But at the beginning was in this way. And so you have to be so good to build in this way, waiting for your time. If you do a capital like Palazzo Rucellai, simple capital, or you are Leon Battista Alberti or his sheets. This architecture, something you don't see it immediately. Very often you don't see immediately. This is one of the reasons, David, because before I was doing so many compliments to your work. Because very often I was thinking, oh, well, it's a David building, but there is nothing that is looking to be, from one point of view, new, from the other point of view, iconic, to astonish me. This is one aspect. Architecture is always very hidden. To want the very Italian difference to perceive this, David, Scarpa and Albini. Scarpa, everything you look at Scarpa is shown. It's a layer. Magnificent, fantastic, we love. Albini is an architect. Albini is an architect. As few in the history of past century architecture. But I wanted to go back to this problem that
Didn't he?
What?
Albini was teaching here, wasn't he?
Fear. Also, that was my professor. Also, my professor. And I remember it for the younger people. Albini was coming to give classes dressed as a doctor with the white glasses. That's a difference. But there is a problem, David, which is the problem that I have always. I agree with you. I agree with you about our condition, our society, which is represented perfectly by one of the most clever essays I ever read about the consequences of putting taxes on the products produced outside of your country. Does it sound something to you at this moment? Gates was writing immediately after the Second World War, the Second World II, this famous essay, how stupid and against any idea of market is to put supplementary taxes on any goods produced. But he said, because we enter in an age, I should say it in Italian and afterwards I try to translate it in English, also if Keynes wrote in English. He discovered in a document of a community, a religious community in England of 18th century, a document which says, all you members of the church, you must enrich yourself. You must become richer and richer, every day richer and richer, because la via del Signore è spianata agli uomini di buona proprietà. The way of God is flat for the man of good property, not goodwill. And this is the statement of Keynes, and we are living in this age. This produces also that our clients, in general, are perfectly uncultivated. Perfectly uncultivated. There is no more one Rucellai asking Leo Battista Alberti to travel with him in Rome. There is no one of the great clients. And what you know very well through your experience, the politician and the public administration now, they share in general the very same ignorance, primitivism of the 90% of the clients. The clients, just on the basis of this statement by Keynes, is the form of the society. So shares all the weakness of the society. And so they cultivate the news, everything news, and so on and so on. I live in a town, Venice. Do you know Venice? Have you been? How many of the young kids have been in Venice?
Everyone speaks French.
No, everyone. No.
Everywhere.
No. Who? Oh, you go. UK. In Venice happens this phenomenon. Every year, twice a year, all the lagoon in front of San Marco Square is full of the biggest private boat in the world. Big, gigantic. And they come to buy contemporary art. Just contemporary art. In one moment of the year. All together, because it's the rituals that they participate in, not because they are selecting through the voyage in the voyage shop, this beautiful blue Picasso, this beautiful strange black. No, they come to participate to a ritual. And they stay there. And they perform their love for art to be member of a ritual. This is the attitude typical of the client today. They go expecting something extraordinarily new. For the same reason, they go to Venice with 100 meters long boats to participate to a party. This is a big problem. And it is a big problem when at the same ignorance is shared by bureaucracy and even worse by politicians.
So Francesco, isn't this the question that the profession has to ask itself now? That if we are witnessing the sort of atomization of society, that we are seeing that things are not holding us together. And if we're in a profession of architecture and planning, which is about building our world, which in a way has the potential to demonstrate collective as opposed to individual aspects of our profession, then isn't this a crisis for the profession as well? Are we happy to continue the same idea that architectural performance is judged by singular, very nice moments, and that we have given up the idea that within this general community of building, designing, planning, architecturing, that we can no longer give shape to common purpose. It's too complicated. We can't find methods to do it. Which is very strange, because if I asked any Roma people, can you tell me what type of town you might want to live in? Close your eyes and tell me what are the things in that town. Most people will have an idea of a town of 5 or 6 stories, nice streets, green spaces, coffee shops. It would not be an argument. It would not be, I mean, I'm sure there will be some contrarian people who wanted, okay, I'm not talking about New York, I'm not talking about, but if those, we are witnessing in Barcelona, in Venice, in Prague, millions of people going to look at towns because they like them. So I don't think we have a problem about what we would want, but we have a problem that we can't get close to building it. You cannot find, counting on your fingers, examples of good, coordinated urban planning or development. It's nearly impossible. When I was in charge of Biennale, I was looking for such projects. Really difficult. Why? If we know what we want, if what we want actually is a very good representation of the converse impulses of our contemporary society, in other words, not just individual comfort, but collective participation, if we know that we would like to belong into something, and if we know that our built world can compensate for this tendency of what you call, the billionaires in their boats and what we all do, seek individual comfort. If we know that planning, architecture, building can do that, then isn't that question a crisis for us, that we have let it go so long that we now don't know how to do it? Even if we know what's good for us, we don't seem to know how to do it. And we seem to amuse ourselves by doing something else instead. That as long as we can produce one or two nice projects and Casabella can publish. Let me be blunt. I would say we're in a country where the conversation about these things is at a very high level. My whole life, the best publications of architecture are where? In Italy. Casabella, Domus, and Tony. The best commentators of architecture are where? In Italy. The best students that you get in terms of their education into your studio are from Italy. So why the hell is Italy not building good buildings? Why are you not? Because this is not comparing England, because we're nowhere near it, but given there's so much civilization, so much knowledge, so much culture, so much awareness, and so much common value in what a city should be, how come Italy can't do it? Because you have stupid students? No. Because you have stupid professors? No. Because you have no talent? No. It's political will. It's the lack of coordination between our profession and society. And that's an isolation. Not just our clients. Not just, the irritating client who wants something else. We can't always play flies. It's because we have not engaged ourselves sufficiently with the forces which we surrender ourselves to. Now, it's impossibly difficult. I'm not saying, I don't know how to do it. On an individual level, what is a young architect meant to do? Say, I'm not going to build the next building because I think it's, I want to be more engaged with planning or something. I don't know. I'm not, but there is a paradox, and I think it's a problem for our profession, and I think as a profession, we should confront this.
Is the question. It's the question. I don't have any answer. I don't have any answer. I think that in any case we are living in a period, in a moment. You are right. You are right. Italy, during the centuries, from the beginning, was always a sun. A sun. Light and fresh. There is this beautiful story of Marino, the great formalist 18th century writer who went from Naples, where I live in. Naples was the largest town in Europe, after Paris in this time. From Naples he went to Paris, and he wrote a letter. I say, you can't believe. They are primitive. They are using sword when they discuss. They kill and they eat with the same knife. And this is a fantastic description of a primitive place. And well, Italy is this. Read the Shakespeare. And look how Shakespeare was reading the Italian poets continuously. Shadow of my shadow, remember. The image of love, shadow, my shadow, is coming from a 15th century Italian tale. Italy is this. And Italy was a very good place for architecture. And everything changed when the war, the entire world, became much more larger. When the boundaries were enlarged as in modern time after Columbus. Well, the time has changed. And we are living in an age of big problems.
And can I ask, in terms of planning, because planning seems to be something where,
we have to decide when we speak of planning if we are speaking of Raphael, of the Roman, or the Romans, or Raphael, or what's happened in Italy when the first process of modernization happened, which was very strong, and which cannot perceive it very well if, David, we are going ahead with this very stupid idea that history is done of parts completely separated that are conflicted each one with another one. For instance, the very same idea that we have of fascist type. All the beautiful railway station modern are built during the fashion, all the school. All the school for the kids, everything was built during the fashion. This means that the fashion was good? No, from my point of view. But they did that. Modern, it's a stronger force.
So we take Milan,
Yeah,
and we take, pre-war Milan and post-war Milan,
yeah.
and, been going really quite a long way. One would have to say that Milan has been quite successful in terms of the mediation between architectural objects and the idea of the city. So why was that? Did Milan have good planning in the 1950s and 1960s, 1970s?
First of all, Milano had very, very good history of modern planning, not only during the 19th century, but also the 1 century before. Number two, the way in which, also in England, but in Italy, and I would say a little bit the same in Germany, they created something for reconstruction of the countries. the most beautiful district of Albini, Gardella, Belgioioso, Ridolfi, and the list arrived to Giancarlo De Carlo, to Aimonino, Young Agonino, Matera, and so on and so on. They had been built by an agency where the employees were 52. 52. I wanted to be very clear in it now. That they ran all the Dina Casa program, and there was one boss, a fascist. Perfectly fascist.
Which years are we talking about?
And they talk.
Which years are we talking about?
We are talking about 1946, 57, no? In a Kazakhstan, in 57. And they did plans. And they did beautiful, the typology of it. If you go to see the building by Abidi, for instance, they are fantastic. Fantastic.
But do you think the plan, so you're accepting my premise that the planning context was part of the architectural performance?
Absolutely.
So if I want to finish this on an optimistic note, I think it's really interesting to look at Milan in those years from point of view of architecture in terms of design, because you had probably what we really need is some coordination, some picture about what a city should be, accepting innovation, accepting, a very high degree of innovation. And you saw that reflected also in the design world, the world of objects and making things. Again, a golden period of design innovation, but design innovation which seemed to stay quite close to human need and individual desire, as opposed to, as we have now, both in architecture and in design, a rather market-driven energy to do with, creating more and more stuff.
Well, I'm not so optimistic as you are. I think that in any case, there is no doubt that during but always, Milano was the driving force in our country, and also, I would say, from a political point of view, if you are not blind, if you are not a strict communist as I am, you should understand things are different. But and there is no doubt that Milano was that. The extraordinary of Italy that it was brought. Milano was the center. But if you go to Matera, this is some of the most beautiful example of contemporary architecture ever. Done in 1953. The 53 was the young architects selected and prepared and examined it. So there was a list of architects which could do that. You have to register that in this list and so on to be selected. But this, I think, was an extraordinary experiment. Obviously, it's an experiment which implies one fact. To use what apparently, in this time, was public money. But it was not public money. It was not public money. It was the pensions of the people that they were used. When you pay the pension, they keep your money for a while, 30, 40 years, and they do the administration of it, and they can invest it in Telsa or any kind of company. but they can invest it in public financing. And all the plan was called INACASA, Istituto Nazionale delle Assicurazioni. They were using the money. This was very clever. Today you can't do any more. There are several reasons, but I cannot explain everything. But this is the big difference. It's not the problem only of the money, but where you put the money. And the decision today is completely different from those that they took in this time. What remains is exactly what David say. It's very simple. It's very simple to say, okay, you private invest the money, and you much better. I'm pretty sure that you do much better than a bureaucrat from the ministry. By sure. But you cannot invest and don't you have the public money which is possible to use if you do a very good administration as they did. I think that this is possible. There are two final things, if I may. Two final things. One. All what you say implies also to have a very different attitude. I live in the town, as I say. They say that I live in Venice. Yes. I live in Venice. One day, when probably nobody of you was born, you know that in Venice you arrive through a bridge. I was driving through the bridge and I saw that nearby on the side, on the right, on the left of the bridge, there was a gigantic columns of buses, always beige, all beige, without any writing on it. And I was surprised, and I asked her. And they say, they are Polish. They were not Polish. They were coming from these countries with their buses that were all the same. And they stopped on the bridge, 7 kilometers long, to sleep inside because they didn't have the money. But the day, and this is just to say that David said something intelligent before, he always says there are other things, is that they slept in the bus because they didn't have the money. But the first thing they did is to travel to Venice when the wall collapsed. Now there are 11 million every year, maybe it's a crowded town. But which is the attitude? Should we ask them to each one of them to pay a tax entering in the town? As our mayor decided. I am against, for one thing, I am not the owner. I didn't build Venice. I didn't build Venice. And why I should ask 20 euros to a kid arriving from Belarus, 12 years old, that arriving in Venice, he perceives something which is beauty, and which opens his mind. Maybe one on 100,000. One kid, but one kid is enough. And I have to be open to this. I have to be open. I have to share, as David said before. I have to share. But not because I am a very good man or I am too good, but because the shares produce richness and reach everybody. To share. A last thing for the young students. I know the school. I know your school, and you have to fight against one thing. That the university is the place where you learn to exercise your freedom. The only thing the university teach is to exercise your freedom. You have to exercise it every day, in every moment, with any teacher and with any of your friends in the school.
Bravo, sì, sì. When we asked to Francesco if he agreed to this event, he supported us, and we got in touch with David Chipperfield offices, and they answered yes, we will do that, but with a promise. 99% of the people of the classroom should be students. So promises are promises. We have plenty of students here, old students too. And if you agree, we have a couple of questions, from students. And if you are, I'm talking about young students and not young old students. If any students wants to, please come here. Thank you very much. Thank you, Francesco. Marvelous, sir. A couple, 2 or 3, no more, please.
My question to Chipperfield, sir, is that in one of your lecture you told that in developing country the community spaces are always subjected to abuse. It was a lecture where you were explaining about the museum in Mexico City. So what could be the better solution for community space in developing countries where it is subjected to abuse?
Well, I don't think I said all developing countries. I said that the challenge in Mexico City was that public space was subjected to mistreatment and people using it in a certain way. But I don't think that's a reason not to have public space. I think there are different traditions of public space, but I would say I don't know whether we're treating our own public space that well anymore. And I would go back, one of the themes that I keep talking about is that our profession has focused so much on buildings. And we've forgotten the responsibility of this stuff that's between buildings. And the work that we're doing in Galicia with my foundation started off about architecture. We were asked to try to help on questions of bad buildings, but very quickly we discovered the quality of the town or quality of the village was compromised not by bad buildings, but by bad public space, by traffic problems, by parking in the wrong place, by neglect, by empty buildings. And I think this is one of the problems of our time. Who is responsible for the collective things? The private sector is not interested in that. The private sector doesn't manage that. So we need, if we still believe romantically that the town and the city is some sort of physical expression of our desire to be collective, which, as I said before, in a way is a sort of the opposite to what so much of society is doing to us, which is about private individual comfort, at the expense of the idea of the collective. If we believe that architecture, urban planning, the way that we build our towns and environments can contribute to the notion of the collective, then I think we have to find ways of addressing that and taking ownership, because at the moment it's a gap. It's a gap of responsibility.
Thank you very much. Another one, if we have.
Good evening. Sir Chipperfield, Mr. Francesco Dal Co noted that the architect's role in projects has been dropped from 5% to a staggering 2%. Considering your work in Galicia, would you say that small, simple projects are the way to go for us young architects to improve the world and reverse this process of the loss of strength? So rather than chasing a big idealistic vision.
He's Professor Dal Co, not Mr. Dal Co. I would never want to underestimate the importance of architecture. I would never want to underestimate how important a beautiful building is, or wonderful space, or. But I do think that the challenge of our moment is more environmental, from the point of view that I explained before, both in terms of the way that where we live and how we build our places of living can be a contribution towards or compensation against growing social and financial inequality. In other words, if everybody can have a decent place to live, a decent street for their children to play, and a decent school, then this is a contribution to equity. And I think we have a role to play in that as architects. Or conversely, if we don't play a role, I think we're neglecting it. We're not guilty in the same way that you don't always have to participate in something to be guilty, but by not participating, you can also be vicariously guilty. So it's a profession. And the second thing is, I would say that my experience working with politicians in Galicia is that as architects, we can see the end game. We can see what can be gained. When we discuss with traffic engineers the problems of road, they don't see an issue. What's wrong with the road? And they say, yeah, but it's ruining the village. But that's not my problem. I think as architects, we can see the connectivity between everything. And I think we are in a much better position than most to see the connection between and anticipate the consequence of physical actions. And therefore, I think as a profession, and I would certainly say as a young generation, I think you should relax about the idea that your career depends on you becoming a star architect, because it's highly overrated. And instead, think about how we as architects could become more useful, which is a very vague and slightly hopeless piece of advice. But I suppose what I'm saying is that I think I would appeal to a younger generation to ask more questions and in a way, not look at the model, not look at the model of a certain type of architectural success. I think there are many examples now of architectural practice where people are really getting engaged in social and environmental actions. And I think I would look much more what they're doing. And there's many people doing this now. Thank you.
For Professor Dal Co. And as someone who shaped importantly like the culture of architecture through magazines like Casabella, my question would be, how do these magazines contribute to the formation and education of architecture students, and if the students should continue to venerating them, or if they should be more proactive in opening some new discourses, conversations about what the students deem more important for the future?
I don't know. really. Just try to do in an honest way the fundamental work, which is to form the people, to form the audience. And then one of the aspects that is peculiar for me, probably this is due to my nature, is the fact that I think that it is important always to have a look for what's happened in the past. Never forget that there is a past. In an age as our one, where I study very often the young student, but not only the young student, they things to live in a kind of bowl of soap, new, completely new. No, I don't think so. I was not trained during my entire life to think in this way. I have no idea. I don't think that history is able to teach anything to everybody. I think that without history it's impossible to think. It's impossible to think. Starts on the time in which Prometheus was stealing the fire from Zeus. And Zeus became very cazzato. And they take away the food to the human being and say, so now you have to work. If you still made the fire, now you have to have your food. I think that this teach but give you the opportunity to think. And for this reason, I try to give an attention to, and also to, if it's possible, and try, but I'm not sure to be able to do it, to show to our readers that there are some aspects in the recent of the ancient past which can be continuously rediscovered, and they are full of meanings in terms of thinking. This is what I desire to do. That's it. I try to take separate what is normally the part of magazine. Magazine is something which has its own life on the market. If you don't buy it, the magazine finish. And there is a part in the magazine which is financed by advertisement. And in Casabella there is a very peculiar solution. I don't know if you read it or not, which are 2 red pages. Inside, the magazine is inside of 2 red pages. And I have the responsibility only of the economic of this part inside of the page. I don't want to love it because it's another work. It's another job with the advertisement and all that. That's it. It's a very simple way. It's a very simple magazine. There is a responsibility. The magazine was born in 1928. And so when they gave it to me, I had the responsibility for this past. Number 2, as an history which is pretty interesting, and I can explain everything, but it's not this the case. So you have to have a certain responsibility with it. This is what I try to do, and since I don't have anymore the job to give a class every week as I did before, now I'm much more relaxing. And for this reason, I think that I'm very pretty ready to torture more my readers. Thanks.
Thank you so much for some speech. And I have only one question that I remembered in my bachelor thesis 3-4 years ago. I read this mail from Jacques Herzog to Sir Chipperfield about a letter about like how Sir Chipperfield asked Herzog what architecture can do in the contemporary world, and his answer was nothing. and I read it on Domus, and this question has been lingered in my head forever. And I appreciate a lot this paradox and miscoordination you were mentioning between our discipline and the rest of society. And I remember it's a letter, both of you were talking about how we were just standing with the mighty. And I'm just wondering, like, if it's rather a naive and delusional thought in our time to still think architects, like our role is to change it, to change other social equality, environmental problems. Like, does it make sense if we're just to be the mighty, to be one of the planners, if planning is really is a problem? And I don't know, if like you're bringing our generation, not yours, would you have changed your approach?
Thank you. First of all, never take too seriously what Jack Herzog says, because he's quite contrarian. But secondly, I think if I cut to your point, you know, are we being realistic to imagine that we can change anything, and that does architecture have a role there? And all I would keep going back to saying is that if you take the other way around, that, you know, if we didn't have, let's say, if we didn't have the environmental crisis that we have, then maybe there's no great reason to change our habit. But if the industry that we're part of is contributing more than 40% of carbon dioxide to our system, then surely there's something that we've got to do, like everybody has to do, in the same way that, you know, architects are individuals as well. I mean, we're all human beings and we have the same responsibility. And the same way as I think the question is, from our own perspective, from the seat that we sit in as architects, to what degree can we contribute to these questions? And yeah, I mean, as we said before, from the comfort of your seat in your office, probably not very much. The question is, shouldn't we become a bit more questioning of that in terms of architectural education, architectural practice, and those things? It's not easy, but I think that it's not unrealistic to imagine, because in a way, architecture carries this pretension anyway. So we pretend we change the world anyway. So we keep telling everybody that what we do is good. You know, I mean, we've become a sort of competitive animal. And one of the things when I did the Biennale Common Ground, I tried to make an atmosphere in Common Ground. The question to all of the 120 architects I invited, I said, you cannot show yourself in competition with the other architects. It's not a sort of shop, a talent shop. I wanted us to show what we can do as architects, as a group, you know. It's very strange to me that the profession that professes to work in the common good is so individualistically competitive. And if we were doctors, it wouldn't work. You know, it doesn't work if every doctor is trying to compete with another one and say, I'm better than that. We're not doctors, we don't save lives, you know? But at the same time, as a profession, we do keep claiming that what we do is a contribution. So if we keep claiming it, then we have to question that claim.
So what a marvelous moment. Thank you very much, Francesco. Thank you very much, David. I cannot finish before to thanks Roberto Bosi and Giuseppe Zamperi that makes this possible. Please clap your hands because they are very useful for that. And for all the day through, I really thank Andrea Deschamps. Thank you very much. And Osendo of us that make it possible, Imun, that is a light companies that help us to organize this moment. So thank you, Deb, and thank you, Francesco, for all.